You see the ONS data that came out a couple of weeks ago that said for the first time ever since records began, 50.1% of women are childless by 30. So there are more women without children at 30 than there are women with children. The first time ever.
Well, somebody clipped a part of one of my podcasts, I believe it was, where I was talking about what our society does to 19-year-old women or 18-year-old women, 19-year-old women. We just lie to them all the time. You know, the first lie is there's nothing more important than your career, more or less by definition. So that's the first lie. The second lie is there will be nothing more important to you in your life than your career. So that's the second lie. And then the third lie is there should be nothing more important in your life than your career. So that's the third lie. And then implicit in that is the idea that children are a burden, and that the idea that women should have children is part of the oppressive patriarchy.
It is brutal to watch what popular culture is doing to motherhood, to women, to families, to children. I have had all sorts of important work that I have done as a professional woman. I spent a number of years in the investment business. I started and sold a business. I'm currently self-employed with my husband, and I was out of the workforce for close to 16 years, raising kids. 2 of my children were my husband's from his first marriage, but they were 4 and 7 when we got together, and those children are my babies. I cannot imagine my life without them. And my son, our son, who is now 16. I wish I had had the opportunity to have more children. It is really a shame that there's this complete assault on the very innate desire that young women have to be moms, to be wives, to love the men and children that they have in their families.
And should be resisted, and who are men to tell me what I can do with my body, and hey, fair enough, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, I've worked in female-dominated occupations my entire life, and so I've watched women progress through their professional careers at every level of attainment, from the lowest to the highest, and observed what happened, and relatively, I would say, bias-free, because I didn't know. And what I've seen is that as women progress towards their late 20s, there's a psychological transformation, and what happens is that they place less emphasis on their career and way more emphasis, particularly on having a child. And that really reaches a crisis point around 29 or 30 for the vast majority of women, and their attitude flips. And I've seen it flip very dramatically.
I can tell you this firsthand. I was in a very male-dominated industry in the investment business. I think in the 15, 16 years I worked in that industry, there were 2 other women that I worked with who weren't administrative staff, who were actually investment advisors. It's a male-dominated field, and it's very difficult to find a way to transition from being seen as a professional to being seen as a wife and a mother. And when I was able to make that transition, I actually had to move across the country in order to do so, because in my society, I was seen as the single woman who had so many things going for her, but just didn't have a family. And I couldn't see myself in that position in the society or the culture that I was living in. And it had nothing to do with them. It had to do with who I had become in the battles that I was fighting. I consider myself to be one of the lucky ones because I was able to have a child after having had a wonderful career. I was 37 when my first child was born. And by that time, for a lot of people, they are panicked that it's never going to happen for them. A lot of women, as men can't have children. Let's just make that clear.
Dramatically with many women. And I suppose the most single convincing evidence of that, I worked with high-end lawyers in Toronto for about 10 years. I was part of an organization. We went to law firms, high-end law firms, and said, send us your most productive people, and we'll help them iron out whatever wrinkles there might still be in their life. And the advantage to them is that things will go better for them, and the advantage to you is they'll be even more productive. And there's a good management dictum, which is pay the most attention to your most productive people because they're bringing in the bulk of your revenue disproportionately. And so I worked with men and women who were at the peak of their careers in a very difficult enterprise. And so these were women who were generally very attractive, well put together physically, pretty stable psychologically, extremely conscientious, very, very smart, and high achieving from like junior high all the way through high school, university, law school, onto the top firms, rocketing up through the ranks, full partnership by the time they were 29 or 30. And all the law firms, all the women bailed out, all of them. The law firms couldn't keep them. And I was really, and I talked to the women a lot about this because I was very interested in it, because I knew the law firms were bending themselves over backwards and tying themselves into knots trying to retain these women, because why wouldn't they,
There's no way any career that you can have, no matter how fabulous, can replace the need to have children as a woman. And this Chelsea Handler video that's going around is despicable. A day in the life without children as how old is that woman now? 50, 60, I don't know. She should be having grandchildren at this point, and she has denied herself that wonderful experience out of a desire to have choice and pleasure. And not to get into yet another issue, but she's aborted the kids she could have brought into the world. She could be celebrating those kids and grandkids possibly today, instead of bragging about how great it is to have no obligations. Life without obligations is nothing.
Just being greedy capitalists is enough. They don't want to lose their high-performing women because they're performing at the highest level, and they couldn't keep them. The women wanted to have 9-to-5 jobs. They wanted to bind the job so they could have a life, and that was especially true once they got interested in having a child or had one. And what they really came to was a very interesting realization. So because they were highly conscientious women, they sort of did their duty and worked hard and diligently and didn't pop their head up to ask questions. They were in junior high, they got the best grades. They were in high school, they got the best grades, right till they reached partnership. But that's sort of an apogee, right? You hit partnership in a senior law firm, it's like you're at the top of your profession. Well, then what? Well, so then they looked around and they thought, here I am with all these.
Nothing you can do at work compares to being a mother. And work doesn't need you. Stick your finger in a glass and pull it out. That's how quickly you'll be replaced. But your family needs you every single day. And there's nothing in this world like knowing that there are little people, your little people, who need you, who come running to you, who smile with you, who laugh with you. And you watch these amazing creatures grow into young adults, and then they leave, and they have everything that you dreamed for them, even though it's difficult. They have roots and they have wings, and they are sure about who they are. And a good deal of that is because they come from homes with mothers who are available to them whenever they need them.
It's like hyper-competitive men, perfectly willing to work 80 hours a week nonstop to stay at the top. What the hell are they doing? Because that's the real question. What is it that characterizes this small percentage of hyper-competitive men? You can assume that that's how everyone should be, but first of all, that isn't how everyone is. Or you can flip that and say, well, there's only a small minority of human beings that are willing to do this, to work flat out 8 hours a week. I mean, they're certainly being paid for it. Let's make no mistake about that. But well, what about the rest of life? Well, that's what the women asked. Why am I doing this? And that's a great question. Well, for men, there's a different answer than for women. It's a really different answer. And it isn't like the men are exactly thinking this through. It's more like this is an integral part of male motivation. The more successful you are as a man, the more women like you.
But the problem that you have now is that as women are getting better educated, with more employment, more status, more prestige, they compete themselves out of their ability to find an attractive mate. As women raise up...
100%. When you have women who are competing against men in a vocational space, it somehow makes those women who are hyper competitive a little less appealing to men. And it has nothing to do, before I hear people saying, you just don't want women to be successful and that I'm dissing successful women. My daughter is a West Point grad and an Apache pilot, graduated first in her class. I want nothing but competitive situations where women can show up and be strong. What I also think is crucial to our society is to have women who can say, I've checked the box of a career and now I want to move on and have a family, and do it before it's too late and they can't bear children. That's the risk that we're running as a society. And the degradation of the nuclear family is going to be the end of us as a nation and as a culture. And you see the onslaught coming from every single angle. You can ignore it if you like. That's the truth.
Through the dominance hierarchy. And this is
Competence hierarchy.
competence hierarchy, sorry.
Okay.
Who's going to tell women the equal access to opportunity that you have recently just acquired? Actually, what that's doing is it's making it more difficult for you to find a mate that you're fundamentally attracted to.
Yeah, well, it does a lot of things. I mean, it does provide women with a lot more opportunity on the economic front. It does decrease their dependency on their mate in relation.
All right. So I'm wondering how much of this, women who are really high earners, who are leaving the workforce at the apogee of their financial trajectory, how does that play into that whole nonsense conversation about the wage gap between men and women? That would be a fascinating thing to look into. And it wouldn't surprise me if Jordan Peterson has something on that. The other thing is it is good to not be dependent upon a mate who's going to be abusive, but mates should be dependent upon one another, regardless of who is the earner. I need Tom, and Tom needs me, and one of us earns a whole lot more than the other. That doesn't mean one of us doesn't bring the value. He's the top earner. He always has been in our marriage.
Relationship to economic security. And countries that are willing to educate women, that's the best predictor of their future economic success. So if you look at developing countries and you want to find out what about a developing country is most likely to predict the fact that they will continue to thrive economically, it's their attitude towards the education of women. And a couple more things. Women's educational status predicts their children's educational status, but men's educational status doesn't. So that's also an important multi-generational effect. Or someone released a clip of me talking about some of the things we just talked about. And it went out on YouTube Shorts, and it's got like 5 million views in a month or something like that. And the comment section is unbelievably vitriolic. Because every single comment is vitriolic, and it's all from women. It's like, who is this old white bastard telling us what we should do with our bodies? And I wasn't being judgmental. I was just saying exactly what I said to you, which is, well, I've watched women over the entire course of my life with, I would say, an affectionate eye. I love my sister, I love my wife, I have a daughter, I love my mother. I'm pretty happy about women, all things considered. I don't have an axe to grind in relationship to how they should conduct their lives. I don't even know how they should conduct their lives. I've watched what happens. And I've also watched what happens to women who hit 29 or 30 and then can't conceive. And that is not fate I would wish on anyone. It's awful. And 30% of couples fall into that. 30% of couples have difficulty conceiving. It's a lot. And the probability that you'll have difficulty conceiving increases with age. And so, c'est la vie. But it's very interesting to me to see how vitriolic those comments have been and how uniform that is. Because
do you ever wonder why there's so much hatred when somebody speaks the truth?